Are aliens real? ICE seems to think so, but not those aliens. That's not the ones that we're talking about. We're talking about extraterrestrial beings, little green men. There's a lot of prevailing theories around there, but I think some of the most compelling ones are just the statistical inevitability of alien life. Oftentimes, humanity is described as a calendar year, and if you were to take a calendar year of all of, oh look, my marker doesn't work. Why did I even set up the dry erase board? If you took a calendar year of all of Earth's 4.5 billion years of existence, which fits into the last third of approximately the 14 billion years of what we think the universe existence is, you would get the last, I think it's like the last hour of the last calendar day of the last month of the last aspect of all of time that human beings would exist. A lot of people like to forget that we had an entire extinction event where the majority of the prevailing animals on this planet died off, and then humans then had to start from almost scratch and come up from a mammalia into existence. So the idea that an infinite that would exist on one planet in the solar system, in a solar system that's one of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in the galaxy, of one galaxy that's not just almost an infinite number of galaxies in the universe, the idea that that doesn't occur again elsewhere is preposterous. However, you can't just ask whether or not aliens exist. If you want to take a very cold scientific approach to it, they have to have existed at some point. There's other more important questions. Are they intelligent in the way that we perceive intelligence or self-awareness, or are they beyond that or parallel to that, right? And also, do they exist at the same time as humans exist? I feel like that is a crucial question that a lot of people forget to ask. Because I think on the long shot, they want to think that humans as a species have existed for about 250,000 years, 250,000 years. We've been able to record things that can last for maybe a couple thousand, right? We've been able to observe outside of our atmosphere for centuries, which is a blip in our existence, not to mention the existence of our planet. And these planets are constantly on a universal scale being formed and destroyed, and stars of different sizes and calibers are being formed and burning out and destroyed. Because think about it, we have stars that we can observe that are going supernova or phasing out or dying of old age now. We have stars that are coming into existence now. The prevailing idea is that we are a very middling planet in a very middling solar system, in a very middling galaxy, in a very middling part of the universe. So the idea that intelligent life has just come and gone and completely missed us would not be foreign. And then why would there be any evidence of that here on Earth, right? That's just the law of eventuality. You know, it has to happen. If it happened here, it would stand to reason that it would happen all the time, everywhere, over and over again, in different ways, shapes, and forms. Now, my personal feelings on this is we always talk about aliens as if they are little green men. They look different. They're slimy. They're scaly. They're this. They're that. In my personal opinion, I feel like if they were going to be anything that we could relate to as self-aware and human, then they would be similarly like us, something that we would consider almost mammalian for the same chemical reasons that we exist. I think that you would look at this scientific anomaly as what scientists like to refer to here on Earth as crabification, because several species will find similar strategies to form a similar style crustacean. Why? Because it's a very efficient thing to do. It's very protective. It's a good strategy for propagation and survival. And so that's, but then realistically, is human, is being self-aware, is being intelligent, is that a good strategy for propagation and survival? Some people would say no. Some people say it's too effective, and then we end up consuming more resources than we can possibly allow to be naturally replenished. That's yet to be seen. We've obviously began, we haven't ended yet. So we don't know what the end of the human story is going to be, and we have no other human story to truly compare it to. So if we are optimistic and we assume that evolving in the manner in which we have and continue to do so is beneficial to us as a species, one way or the other, then we would assume that other similar environments under the similar constraints and similar demands would have similar evolutionary results that would result in something like us. That's where you sort of get this this Star Trek idea that most aliens are vaguely, essentially humanoid, as opposed to the Star Wars concept where we are vastly different. I think that us being relatively similar, for the most part, as far as the perceivable, the reality that we see in variance here on Earth, as far as height and shading and color, I think melanin is a very natural protein that would exist to protect an alien species from the ultraviolet rays on their planet, and also they could have overcast skies where it would be beneficial to have less melanin. These same strategies would still exist to be exploited in different places as far as the circumstances being the same, which is where you get to this idea of an M-class planet. Now, M-class planet is referred to often in Star Trek, especially The Next Generation, in other science fiction publishings. What they're talking about is a planet in the habitable zone, right? Which is far enough away from its star where it's getting enough radiation and heat from the star to create liquid water, and also allow for photosynthesis in plants, but not so far away that the water would freeze and it would have a hard time in chemical reactions and a hard time for plants to basically photosynthesize and create half of the chain of biology that would exist for an animal to counteract that. That's a whole biological thing. Ask your teacher or look it up in your local library. What I want to get at is that there are so many other factors that I'm sure, scientists bring up. Like, we know these things theoretically, but could life as complex or as prevalent exist on a planet that didn't have an iron core spinning to create a magnetic field to protect it from cosmic rays so that its atmosphere didn't just blow away, like some people theorize happened to Mars? What about it being rotating on a tilted axis, which is unique, at least in our solar system, so that it creates seasons, right? Because the chemical reactions that would be caused inside of cells in order to create self-propagating proteins and things like that would even lead to life in the first place, I'm not sure they could exist without seasons warming and cooling vast oceans of some kind of liquid that, we would call salt water. I think that only the conditions on Earth would have to exist on another planet or so close to it for any kind of life to sprout forth. And even then, it would probably be a crapshoot. But an eventuality, nonetheless. If they existed long enough, I would stand to believe that it's bound to happen. One of the things that I think that a lot of science fiction gets wrong, it's interesting, Star Trek, I'm going to refer to Star Trek The Next Generation a lot in this, because they explore a lot of ideas. But in one idea they basically have all of these different, the species that exist on the Enterprise go through some situation where they regress in evolution and start turning into lesser and lesser animalistic versions of their now humanoid self, which does not make sense. Well, it would make sense if you looked at, like I said, the crabification, that they are all moving towards essentially a hominid shape with different features left over from their formal evolutionary states. To me, it would make a lot more sense to have a common ancestor. That's how it would be here on Earth, right? And that was also explored either in Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, where they essentially said, oh yeah, all the species of the planet, were seeded by one master race that came along and seeded everybody. That's why you all just look like basically the same thing, but with stuff glued on your face in different places. I do believe that if you could scientifically prove that the idea that life only exists on Earth would have to be a religious one. Because for the circumstances to only be so perfect that it only exists on one planet, like I said, in a scale of an entire universe that just sits out there wasting space, literally. That the idea that the only self-aware, reasonably intelligent as we perceive it species is ourselves, it would have to be intelligent design. There would have to be some reason behind it in an extra dimension that we can't perceive or even begin to comprehend. So one of the things that's always bugged me about the alien questions, if you look at it scientifically the way I do and say that, all right, if aliens are an eventuality, right, they have to exist, and then you can take a leap of faith and say that they exist at the same time, and then take another leap of faith and say that not only do they exist at the same time, but they can perceive each other in a comparable fashion, where communication is possible, right? Those are a lot of ifs. There's been a lot of science fiction that has explored what that would look like if that didn't work out. You know, if we couldn't quite perceive what they are, or they couldn't quite perceive what we are. Think Twilight Zone for that. And like I said, and a million other publications. That's kind of the point of science fiction, is to ask and explore these possibilities and to really get us thinking about them. But if those things happened and we became aware of one another, let's say the prevailing theory is that most of the population here is not aware necessarily of any kind of extraterrestrial life, but let's say an extraterrestrial organization is aware of us. All right, and that's the direct root of the phenomenon that we are constantly witnessing that are so prevalently documented in ufology. It would stand to reason that a variety of species would then predicate a variety of attempts to contact us, right? Which is why in other words, there's no aliens do this, aliens come in saucers, aliens beam from another planet, aliens X, Y, and Z. Because if there's 1,000 different alien species, then there would be 1,000 different ways for them to attempt to contact us. Now, to me, a situation that's essentially explored in the three-body problem is the one that I find most reasonable and the one that supports the most evidence that seems the most reasonable. It explains other things, in my opinion, which is instead of sending a physical body to another planet, you would send just your consciousness, because you simply want to perceive the other planet. You want your consciousness to perceive the other consciousness, even if it's on a physical plane, right? And what's fun about that thought process is then it starts to explain, well, how would you do that? Well, there's nothing there for your thoughts to go into except for the other animals. You don't necessarily want that. But what if you could cast your thoughts into essentially a biological spacesuit, right? If you were to build a biological spacesuit to put your consciousness into to explore an alien planet, what would it look like? Well, to me, you would want yourself to be strong, essentially hominid in shape, because we do pretty good here, hairy for protection, versatile with phalanges so that you can manipulate your environment. And all those things make me think Bigfoot or skunk ape or Yeti or whatever. All of these cryptid phenomena could be explained by a consciousness being sent from a foreign planet, a foreign intelligence, into our planet, and using available biological material to combine it remotely into a shape, which is the reason why we would never find bones or family or genetic printing of any of those animals, right? Because as soon as they're done, the energy that's holding them together, which is not natural, would allow it to discorporate into biological nothingness. So they would not need to eat or exist as an animal would, except for long-term exposure. But who's to say they can even do that? And so that's why any witnesses of Bigfoot, you can't find Bigfoot later, because Bigfoot is just a spacesuit for an alien's conscience. And then when they're done using that spacesuit, it just goes back into the biological material that's in the soil. And there's no evidence left behind. There's no hair, there's footprints, which is all we ever find of Bigfoot. Okay? This could be said for a lot of different cryptids. The other thing that this could explain is, what if they used necrotic material, dead animals, right? That would explain a lot of the phenomenon that we see at Skinwalker Ranch. But then Skinwalker Ranch brings up other interesting phenomenon, right? There's mechanical aspects that people have heard mechanical sounds. They've seen mechanical looking dark shadowy figures opening hatchways into lighted corridors that go into nothing, right? So then that brings up this idea of like, well, what about the physical spaceships that we think we see? That's like a whole nother thing. How do you get a it would take, like in War of the Worlds, they would have to be here for millions of years. They would have to have the foresight of eons. And maybe there's alien races that can do that. Maybe they exist on a plane that we don't understand, and maybe they exist outside of time so that they can do that. All these things are things that we don't have answers to, but no one ever seems to want to talk about in such a manner, especially the fact that we don't truly understand the space, the intergravitational, intergalactic, interuniversal forces that exist in outer space. We're starting to. We observe them. We try to measure them as best that we can. But we as our own people, we can only observe at such a higher level than we exist. But yeah, there's been there's stories. There's the Russian guy who got his shirt burned off by a spaceship, and no one's life has ever been benefited by claiming alien contact or abduction, which would be have to be a physical visitation. None of these things has ever benefited any human from writing books or talking about it. They may gain notoriety within the ufology circles, but that's not enough to really get rich and famous off of. So then what is even... I say that to say that there's no real benefit into just making this stuff up. So these people are experiencing something, and it just confuses me why there's not other theories brought up. Like the Foo Fighters, it seems like there was a great flap of UFO activity before and after, hovering essentially around the nuclear detonations that existed on this planet. To me, that would make sense. That many neutrons going flying off in the atmosphere, that much energy released all at once would be detected not only through space, but possibly through time or some other wavelength that we're not aware of, that we can't perceive yet, right? And that would explain why you saw aliens in Roswell or the Foo Fighters over the Pacific around Japan, and why you see different kinds of out in the ocean in isolation. You see different kinds of alien phenomenon out there because they've tested all kinds of insane, crazy equipment out in the middle of nowhere on the water. But then, so while we propose so many of these different ideas, we have no real answers. I think it's the most frustrating thing when it comes into talking about aliens is the one sure thing that you can know about somebody that knows absolutely nothing is when they're absolutely sure about anything. They're clearly making it up because all we have is questions. Why is this so mysterious? Well, we can only look so far out in a very big universe. Most of our looking has to do with just kind of literally listening for energies, listening for sometimes physical sounds. But there are a lot of theories of why, if aliens are legit, why can't we perceive them on a more regular basis? Well, some theories are, we're a backwater planet. There's nothing around us. There's no reason for them to be wandering through here. There's also nebulous clouds that exist that could be hiding the bulk of the universe's perception of us. And then of course there's the more fun theory of that certain circles of humans are very aware and have been cooperating with alien intelligences and working with them to keep their identities secret from the rest of us for either nefarious or noble reasons. But if you were to delve into the depth of why do they keep visiting us when we're not part of some intergalactic community, right? There's got to be, why do they keep coming here? Well, there's only a handful of answers that would even begin to explain that. We might have some resource that is precious to them. What was that? There was a Wild West with Aliens movie that was based on a comic that was fantastic. That was just like, yeah, they came here for gold because gold is important out in the universe. Who knows? We could have something that they want that is, even if they can get it somewhere else, it's easier to get here. I mean, it's the same reason we've been shuffling Native Americans off of reservation land every time we find a resource that we want. I mean, I could see them doing the same thing to us. And something like that would explain the physical visits or even the abductions, but not necessarily the post-psychic ones. Why are they just, does it seem like so many times they're just watching us? Are we some curiosity? Could we be on a biological preserve? I mean, that was an idea on Lilo and Stitch. Of course, they were protecting the mosquitoes and not the humans. They didn't care about us. But I mean, that was the whole idea of why aliens never came here, was because we were the equivalent of federally protected by the same aliens that would even come over here. And then the ones that we do see would be just poachers trying to steal whatever precious human biological. They want our juices, is what I'm getting at. I think the aliens really just want our juices. And then, of course, there's happenstance. Maybe we're just one island in an endless ocean that they crash land onto. There's always the crash landing theory. But then there's, what if they want to come here and our being here is purely coincidental and they don't care about us? And they mostly want us to ignore them, which is why they put so much effort into being ignored. But they're here for another reason. We're a staging location for something else. We a forward operating base, a giant microphone, a giant supercomputer to ask the ultimate question to life's in the universe's ultimate answer. Who really knows? And that's, I think, the part that frustrates but also excites more people than anything else, is there's always more questions than answers. And until we get the answers, there's going to continue to be, and the government has more evidence of things, but it's evidence of things that we don't understand. But maybe someday we will. Maybe in our lifetime, maybe not. I don't know. Keep asking questions and keep looking at the sky. My name's AJ.